So before we deep dive into the book, like Simon Sneak says, start with why. So let me just give you a brief background on why this book is being chosen. So being a business coach, when this book was launched, I was very intrigued and I was very curious because the title said $1 trillion coach. And I was like, what can it be? And then I found out that this book has been written by all the executives at Google. So I said, okay, there must be something special about it. So I managed to lay my hands on this book a couple of years ago. And I was so impressed reading it. And I only wish Bill Campbell was alive and I had the opportunity to meet him. I was so inspired reading this book. So like I mentioned, this book is about the late Bill Campbell. He started off as a football coach and then he became a business executive and then ultimately a business coach. And he has coached many of the bigwigs of Silicon Valley, right from Steve Jobs to Eric Schmidt to Sundar Pichai, Sheryl Sandberg. I mean, the list just goes on. So he is like an amazing person. If I were to sum up this book in just one sentence, the $1 trillion coach will help you become a better leader at work. Now, you may ask me how. This book shares about the life and the teachings of the late coach Bill Campbell, and because he helped to build the multi-billion-dollar business of the Silicon Valley. He's worked with many of these bigwigs, like I said, and he's managed to mold and shape many of these companies. What you can also learn from this book is that you get to know a bit more about coaching and how it works and what it's to work with a coach. And I also found that this book has actually, it breaks 3 myths about coaching. The first myth being, many of us think, oh, I don't need a coach, I'm good enough, right? But then what I really, took as a takeaway from this book is, I found that everybody needs a coach. When the bigwigs have been working with a coach, right? Why should, any of us not be working with a coach? And what I also liked, and I think probably what Bill Campbell really followed was, like I said, he started his career as a football coach. Now, if you were to look into the sports world, even the best of players, irrespective of whichever field, right, whichever sport, they all work with a coach. So it made me wonder, why should the business world be any different? The second myth I thought that it breaks was, it gives a very subtle difference between mentoring and coaching. All of us have been used to the fact of mentoring, but at this book, subtly brings out this difference by, emphasizing on the fact that a coach doesn't tell, right? Coach gives your thoughts, challenges you, and makes you come out with the best solution for whatever challenge that you have. The third myth this book breaks is the coach need not be a domain expert. Now, if you were to notice Bill Campbell, he coached both the competitors, that is Apple and Google, but he did not coach them on strategy. So what did he coach them on? He coached them on being better leaders, being better team members, and how to build trust with people, which I think is the essence of leadership. So a little more about the book. After Bill Campbell was, the football coach, and then he moved to the business world, he was working with companies like Kodak, Apple, and many others, and then he became the business coach. And he had a great impact by, working with these leaders. And a lot of these choices the leaders made and the progress they made were thanks to Bill Campbell, that they were able to build $1 trillion companies. And one of the simplest ways, you must be wondering, how can some person manage to do this? So one of the simplest ways that Bill followed, guess what, was just listening to others. Because Bill was known to be focusing his full attention on the people when they talked, and he used to ask them the right sort of questions. In this busy world, sometimes we don't have enough time to listen to other people, and that's what Bill did by just listening to them and asking them the right sort of questions. And I must mention this special thing about the book. What I liked is Campbell's methods that made him a great champion was he brought in many women to the board, right? He made the women sit on the table and be part of the board meetings. And he continued to support women in the business throughout his career. So the top 3 things that stood out for me from this book, if I were to very quickly summarize. One, this sentence really struck a chord with me. He says, people are the foundation of any company's success, and people should be treated as an asset. Now, me being a chartered accountant, of course, people and asset, it was like glaring and it really stood out for me. And I really liked this line a lot. The second thing that really stood out for me was Bill's, the framework of coaching he used to follow on one-on-one. He used to follow and, ensure he would focus on the performance for the job requirements. He would focus on the relationship, with peers. And he would also focus on the management and the leadership style of coaching. And of course, he would encourage innovation and the best practices and how the business can move forward. And the last thing that really stood out for me was he says, compensation, that is the salary, isn't about the value of money. It is an emotional value. And that is so true because, with the salary comes a lot of emotion, right? So these were the three things that really stood out for me. And